Welcome to Brain Awareness Week. Hi, I'm Bec. I'm one of the naturopaths here at My Brain Co. As an organisation committed to supporting brain well-being through scientifically validated nutritional therapeutic supplements, we will be supporting Brain Health Awareness Week with educational events across the week hosted in our Facebook community. We will also be talking to health professionals who themselves have had a unique neurological journey, including today's guest. So let's get into it. Okay, my guest today is actually a very good friend of mine, Sonya Reynolds. She's a Sydney-based nutritionist and a life coach, and her area of specialty has actually been shaped by her daughter's unexpected epilepsy diagnosis. And it's not the only thing she does. So using her skills as a nutritionist, her knowledge of diet, supplements, incorporating complementary medicine, Sonya was able to drastically change the quality of life outcomes from her daughter's condition. So now Sonya works a lot with families who are facing similar neurological or special needs circumstances. And her passion is in gut health, supporting busy, burned out mums, and also working with special needs children. So to say that she's got knowledge to burn would be an understatement. Thank you so much for joining me to have this chat.
Thanks, Bec. So excited to be here and help your community.
Yes, well, of course, it's Brain Health Awareness Week. So hence why we wanted to have some discussions around, these different facets of neurological disease, how it can impact families, but also importantly, what can be done with diet and lifestyle, because sometimes it becomes this forgotten arm in as we seek medical care or medical advice. Sometimes like seeking the advice of a nutritionist or even a naturopath or something like that as part of your team isn't the first thought people have. But I really thought your story was brilliant. So let's just sort of rewind back. Give us a bit of a snapshot of like what life was like after an epilepsy diagnosis with your daughter.
Yeah, so what life was like was really hard. So my daughter was born neurotypical, and at age 3, she had a sudden onset of different types of seizures. And ultimately, what it involved was that she had subclinical or seizures that you couldn't see in her sleep. And basically, when you sleep, as we know, you rest and you learn and you absorb information. So that's why always, if you're going to cram for an exam, you need to have a sleep before you have the exam, because you need to allow this information to be stored. But because her seizures were at night, what happened was she lost all her language at one point. It was where your language is in your brain, and she lost all ability to speak and had thousands and thousands of seizures. And we thought she would die from the condition. It was a really severe condition. Ultimately, what helped her was the ketogenic diet and medical cannabis. And we're not going to talk about that today because that's like a whole other part. But
it's a huge part.
Very strategic. Yeah, huge. We had a very strategic intervention into supporting her. And I was the good girl, Bec. I did what the doctors told me to do, and that's not necessarily a wrong or right thing. But as you said at the beginning of our chat, it is a holistic picture. There's so much more that we can do than just medication. So for me, once we stepped into and really went down the path of dietary interventions and therapy and finding the right support for her, she's now no longer epileptic. She's no longer diagnosed as epilepsy. So I think a real miracle, and something I'm really excited to talk about.
Yeah, so a complete resolution of what was a pretty serious neurological case. But and this is not obviously the only let's call patient, even though it's your daughter, but not the only person who you've seen through your clinical experience with neurological disorders. So obviously you touched on the keto diet. Diet's a massive part of neurological disease. It's probably this unrecognized area of just how profound and how serious it can be and how much neuroinflammation can be caused. So let's have a chat about the differences that you've seen both with Imi and obviously other patients when you've come in and you've intervened with diet.
I love that you asked this. So just to go back, did you know until the 1940s and 50s, when anti-epileptic drugs became more available and had, yeah, it was availability and they'd found some that could work, most people who had epilepsy were put on the keto diet. So it was a number one intervention that was used, and it went out of fashion, as diets do, because there was a way easier option. So how the ketogenic diet works is that it is actually working as an anti-inflammatory in the brain. And that's because the high levels of fat convert to ketones in the body, and then the ketones act as an anti-inflammatory in the brain. And it also stops the firing of the seizure as well. So it's retrograde as well. So the keto diet for neuroinflammation is a really great first stop. Even most of the time now, they won't prescribe a keto diet until you've failed 3 or more medications.
Seems like you should do that the other way around.
But Bec, you know, you've got a tween teen like I do. I have a teen and a tween. And doing a keto diet with those sorts of kids, it's difficult. Like there's so much carby food, packet food around that it's a really hard intervention when you do it the way that they tell you to do it as well. So classical keto, they used to get people to do 90% of the diet as fat. Like that is a huge amount of fat, isn't it?
Yeah, if it's not what you're used to, definitely.
Yeah, and so the good news is with my clients, they can get into ketosis with 50% of their diet being fat. So there is a way of doing it. And when your child is really sick, or even an adult, and we have more control, obviously, of what we put in our own mouths, and I do modified Atkins ketogenic diet with adults and children. What I teach them is they don't necessarily have to eat as much fat as they think they've been told to. Like there's always, you know, influencers from the US that are telling them these huge amounts, and you just don't need it. But what you do need is good sources of protein, and, you know, you are potentially reducing your carbohydrate. But as we know, Bec, and you're a naturopath as well and a nutritionist, what we know is that, you know, good quality carbohydrates coming from plant-based sources like sweet potato, for example, like I would still look at potentially including that, depending on the person and what their seizures are like, because we know that we need these really good quality carbohydrates in our, to feed our good bacteria in our gut.
100%. And so do you only manage their fat, the fat needs with diet, or are you incorporating like supplemental sources as well to boost the levels?
Yeah, great question. I just want a caveat here that if I work with any children, if they're doing the keto diet, I will have them do it underneath the hospital because they need to be cared for and watched, because we know that sometimes side effects can be, you know, kids and kidney stones. That can be managed by adults and children, but I just want to have that caveat. But what I do use is medium chain triglycerides. So MCT oil.
Yep.
I'll say MCT oil because it's way easier than saying medium chain triglycerides 1,000
10 times really fast.
Yeah. So MCT oil is a fat that's converted immediately to ketones. So it's a really quick way to bump up someone's ketones. And, you know, when you look at the evidence, Bec, when you're looking to mild dementia, what they've done is they actually did an intervention arm where it was a couple of tablespoons of MCT oil a day, and they were able to see benefits in the quality of life in these people. So even just using MCT oil with a lot of these people, it can be a really great, cheap, easy intervention. In the end, I just want to, you know, say that we want to know that the MCT oil that we're using is of a really high quality. because it is a fat oxidizer. So we just want to make sure MCT oil is beneficial and a good quality as well.
Obviously keto diets are also high in, or typically higher in protein, which you already mentioned some of the things that need to be monitored, like kidney health. But, you know, are we talking just like meats, or they can still have plant proteins? Like, what do you do there?
Oh, that's a really good question. If I did plant proteins, I'm more likely to use a hemp seed or a hemp protein. I find that if someone's got gut issues, sometimes they can react to some of the plant-based proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So say a pea protein, they might find that a little intolerable. Say that 20 times quickly, intolerable. But I find that I'll use things like collagen because it's a pure protein. I'll use a lot of organic collagen. I'll use hemp seeds. If they can tolerate it, yes, pea protein. I'll also look at organic meat. So meat is not the bad guy. We know really good quality fish and chicken. I would be including that. It would be very hard to do plant-based proteins the whole time, Bec, and do a keto diet, in my opinion. But it's about the quality of the meat that you do ingest, just like anything.
Yeah. I mean, we know that organic diets, there's been some interesting research that have come out just assessing people's, say, toxin exposure or also their nutritional status over, say, conventional dietary sources, you know, traditional agricultural sources of meats and foods, and more organic forms. And I think organic wins, like for the extra price tag that it'll often attract. It's sort of like it's going to pay it forward in your health, so to speak. So yeah, I understand. And obviously the fat profiles that exist in organic meats, particularly if they've been, say, grass-fed, tend to have, you know, much more favorable pro-health fatty acid compositions as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my non-negotiables is either an organic ghee or an organic butter. So ghee is just the fat from instead of butter, which is actually quite low allergen. So basically butter's just the fat. It doesn't really have much casein or lactose. So generally most people can tolerate butter, but there are those really sensitive people that would have ghee. One of the reasons that I recommend the organic forms of that is because we know that those animals, those cows, have eaten the grass. And we keep forgetting that cows eat grass and it's full of omegas and really good for us. So eating good quality fat from an animal is also a really good thing to do too. If people get really caught up in organic and they can't afford it, Bec, you can say, you know, going to the farmers markets and meeting the person that is growing your food and understanding what they're using. Or maybe you choose that anything that you eat, that you're going to eat the skin of. So say grapes and broccoli and cauliflower, maybe you say, okay, I'm going to eat that as organic because you're going to eat the skin, as I said. Something I've started to tell my clients to do is that I'll tell them to get organic veggies or fruit frozen as well.
Yep.
Check where they come from. One point is that there was a lot of organic
Being imported.
Imported organic fruit, and people were getting sick from it. So look at where the source is. It should be Australian. And then what you can do is you can always, you know, get a big packet of cauliflower and always have it in the freezer. And that's what I do now. So I choose what I'm going to have as organic. And then, you know, especially if I'm going to eat the skin or the leaf.
I think with meat too, I can remember something actually Tabitha McIntosh said years ago, and that was like, how can we extend the family budget with good quality food by adding things in? So when we make a spaghetti bolognese, you can make less mince go further for a family meal if you're adding in vegetables, or even she suggested, say, lentils. And,
Mm.
I think too, in Australia, especially, our portion sizes for meat consumption are quite large. Like we could almost halve the portion sizes of the meat that we consume and still get an adequate amount of, the nutrition that we need from our diet, and make kind of like, if your dinner plate was a pie graph, and maybe like 30% of it's meat and the rest is kind of from plants.
Yes.
I think that's a good way to go about it as well.
And there is good evidence, like what you're talking about right now. Sometimes I hate all the diet words and I'm like, oh, eat real food, mostly plants,
Mm.
eat the real protein. But that is really, high fat, low carb, like just really good quality food is still going to be of benefit for your brain and reduce neuroinflammation and support your well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We will talk about neuroinflammation in a little bit more depth in a minute, but it kind of is going to feed in together with what I'm going to ask you next. And that is something I know you have a personal love of, and that is looking at gut function, and particularly assessing and testing gut function, and really putting your detective hat on and finding the problems in
I love
people's
that you're
gut.
digging through the poo.
Maybe not, just metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, like I know as a naturopath, like we know Hippocrates said all diseases begin in the gut. And I think the thing that I've loved about my 20 plus years of being a naturopath is that that continues to be validated by science. And so we know that the gut is this huge gatekeeper to our health. It affects the brain, it affects our immune system, it affects our mood chemicals. Obviously, we're happier people if we're going to the toilet daily. There's a lot of aspects to it. So let's touch on that. Like, talk about the gut brain connection, and how you use that in your neurological patients.
When I'm working with someone, what I tend to do is I'll do something that is called a complete microbiome mapping. And it gives me a really good idea around what someone's functional gut markers are doing. So these are markers like zonulin. We
Mhm.
know this one really well. And what happens is we can have elevated zonulin when there's a bad guy in our gut because it wants to flush it out. But also gluten can trigger this marker as well. So if you think about, you've got this leaky gut and it's got to open up and flush all the bad guys out. What we know is that there's this super highway between our brain and our gut called our vagal nerve.
Mm.
And what happens is that it communicates with the gut and the brain. So what we know is if there's permeability in the gut or leaky gut, potentially what we call is leaky brain. So what
Mm.
that means is bad guys are crossing the blood-brain barrier when they shouldn't be. And that's what's causing the inflammation as well.
Mm.
We also know, like, as you said, we want to be pooping daily to feel good. Part of what's going on is if you're not eliminating effectively, you're not removing these toxic elements that are potentially triggering inflammation in you. So one of the most 101 things that we want to be doing is supporting our body to eliminate. And how we do that is through doing a poo. So, again, it's really important as part of our detoxification, because if the bad guys are recirculating, we're not removing them. When there's this blood-brain barrier dysregulation as well, a lot of food intolerance people or people that have celiac or different dietary intolerances, they can show up with gut signs and symptoms. But I'm sure you know this, Bec, but there is a lot of people who have celiac that never showed up with any gut symptoms. It was their mood and their brain fog and their fatigue.
Mm.
So our diet directly impacts our brain. So if you think about the gut, what's happening is its job is to tag things as okay or not. So if you've got low immunoglobulin A on the gut lining, you're just not able to tag things as safe or not as well. So again, you've got this inflammatory picture going on. So pretty much neuroinflammation, we want to be looking at the gut, no question.
I like to think of the gut a little bit like the conveyor belt at the supermarket. Like, obviously, we're putting things in the top, and as it's moving through, it's going through kind of a scanner, which is kind of what you're talking about with secretory IgA and the immunoglobulins and things. Is like our immune system scans it because it's from the outside, right? And we've put it on the inside. So it kind of barcode scans it and goes, yep, you're okay, you're okay. Oh, hang on, no, you're not okay. And then our immune system might intervene by creating antibody antigen complexes. And, that usually brings with it inflammation. And so if we're constantly consuming things that we don't even realize are causing a trigger to our immune system, we kind of set off this cascade of inflammation that, you can kind of like, it's like a wave at a rock in the ocean. It's just like eroding your health without you even realizing it.
I love your analogies. I'm going to steal the barcode one back.
I don't even think I could take the credit for that. I think that's a Mike Ash thing.
Oh, that's so good. And Mike Ash is a famous immunologist, right?
Yeah.
So we've known this for a long time. I don't know why it's so cutting edge to say what we put in our mouth matters without having to be perfect, right? That's a bit boring. I don't want to be perfect. But at the same token, you can make these choices. And in the end, you can always trial removing something. This isn't necessarily for brain health per se, but a client I'm just working with right now, her son has issues with, he's a celiac and he has issues with dairy. And she's been constipated her whole life, nothing works. And I said, what if we do an experiment? Because it's an experiment, right? Because then you're not sort of being overwhelmed and like, oh my gosh, she's going to take
Sonya's
dairy
not
away.
telling me to give up this really great food I love. I'm just going to try it out. It's less daunting.
Let's experiment. Yeah. And take out dairy and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And this woman texted me and she said, I am pooing like a trooper. And that was literally 3 weeks of no dairy.
Yeah.
So, number one, she was able to eliminate efficiently. And she came to me for mood and brain fog. And I'm like, well, you're not eliminating efficiently. So we really want to think about supporting that. And what we put in our mouth matters.
So we were talking off the camera before a little bit about the devil of gluten and also casein, which is the protein in milk. And so I guess let's kind of dive into that a little bit.
Morphine sensitivity is exactly like it sounds. So morphine, you're thinking about a drug. So what it is that those people, or some people I should say, are more sensitive to the protein in milk or dairy called casein. And what happens is they are literally addicted to it. So when you talk to someone and they'll say, my child is addicted to cheese, and I'll say, you're right. They are literally addicted to cheese. And I have a child that's addicted to cheese. And I usually find they're the ones with, potential neuro issues. And if it's in the house, this is another one I'll hit. If it's in the house, they're climbing in the fridge to get it.
Yeah.
Like
an addict, like climbing over things.
Like an addict.
Yeah. So it obviously really has an impact on those like reward centers in the brain to fire off and make us, that's always been the old naturopathic thing, right? We always crave the things we're typically most intolerant or allergic to. So it's always a bit of a red flag.
Yes. And, if someone puts a nice aged cheese in front of me, like I'm going to eat it, tastes good.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't keep something like that in the house, and I'm not, I don't eat it all the time. But when it's
sometimes
in front
food.
of me, it's a sometimes food and it tastes good. But if you're looking for ways that you can support, your family or yourself, maybe experiment with removing one of these. And, maybe you could even try goat's milk or sheep's milk. They have a different casein. So there's
a different
two
taste
types.
too. They're not my cup of tea.
They are, and I have to say they are not my cup of tea either. But I'll have coconut milk or coconut water, coconut yogurt. I think we've got way many more options now than we did, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We're really lucky that way.
And I think with when it comes to gluten, there's always been this perception that it's only a problem if you have celiac disease, which can be tested for and what have you. But actually, there is a huge amount of people that have a problem with gluten who have no celiac pathology whatsoever. So how often do you see that? I'm guessing all the time.
Yeah, non-celiac gluten sensitivity is really hard to diagnose, Bec, because there's not a test that you can do to say you've got it or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So say someone wants to know their celiac, they'll usually do celiac serology, and they'll look at how your body's reacting to gluten, and you've got to be eating enough gluten to get that result as well. So if you're not eating gluten and you do it, you're not going to know really if you're reacting to it. So you've always got to be eating gluten when you're checking it. But if you're reacting to gluten and you're wanting to check it, I would say to you, you've probably got a gluten sensitivity. But I just wanted to have that as a conversation point.
Yeah,
and then
it goes hand in glove with a lot of neurological problems. Like if you have a history in yourself, or your immediate family of neurological disease, cognitive decline, autoimmunity, these are often ones where straight away I'm thinking, how much gluten are you consuming and can we get rid of it?
Yeah, and it might be with an intolerance or a sensitivity, it might be about how much they're eating. That's right, Bec. So if you're eating wheat Bix for breakfast, number one, throw it in the bin, never eat it again. And then then you're eating a sandwich and then you're having pasta for dinner. That is a lot of wheat. Now, and I say that in a loving way. Like, I get it. As I said, I've got kids too. What I try and do is I try and mix up the different grains that they're exposed to so they're not always exposed from the same grain. So if someone feels like they're always cloudy and sort of symptoms they can't put their finger on, and as you say, that autoimmune picture, maybe they could try something like spelt, which is a slightly different type of wheat. It's more of an ancient grain. Maybe they could try some rice, maybe quinoa, and just keeping those different varieties up so that you're not always exposed to the one thing. But if someone thinks they've got non-celiac gluten sensitive, they really need to work with a practitioner to try and figure it out, because it's not like you run one test and you know the answer. You want to know what's going on in the gut. You might do a gut test. You might do some blood tests. You might see what their iron levels are. If there's inflammation, you may not be absorbing that iron, things like that. So it's a bit of a diagnosis that you really need someone to advocate and support you through.
I would say that I have noticed as well that a lot of people who just, no matter what they do, they can't get their iron levels up. And that's obviously really important for the health of our immune system, and our energy production, and also for our brain. It's like, I think it's the first or the second most abundant mineral in the brain. So I do find that if everyone's like, oh, I've tried all the things and I can't take iron supplements, but I've tried it and my iron levels are still terrible. You take them off gluten and it's almost like removing this barrier to your body absorbing that nutrient. I suppose if it's doing some unseen damage to the gut, then yeah, it's going to affect gut lining, transporter proteins, absorption, nutrient delivery from place to place. Makes sense.
And something further from that as well, what we know is, as you say, there's the nutrient transporter. So we know that with iron, it needs to be transported as well. So there are different probiotics and clinically trialed probiotics that can enhance your absorption of iron. And further from that, they're actually anti-inflammatory probiotics
Mm.
as well. So I definitely see if there's an issue with gluten or an issue with iron, I'll go and look at that as well, 100%. And yes, especially little kiddies, if they're really fatigued and, like my youngest will not get a blood test back, like will not, like
I don't
refuses.
blame her.
Yeah, right. So we don't really know. We don't know what her iron is like. But what we can do is I'm giving her a daily anti-inflammatory probiotic because I believe that there's something else going on. So I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on her gut to support her iron levels.
Which, I think iron deficiency and essential fatty acid deficiency, they're kind of these things that most people are deficient in. More than half of the people that you walk through your door are probably deficient in that on any day of the week.
Chicken skin. So if you've got chickens, if you've got the raised bumps on
I
the
forget what
side
that's
of your
called.
arm, yeah, that is a real sign. I love that you said essential fatty acid deficiency because the whole point about essential fatty means you need to get it from outside of your body. We don't make it. So if you've got these sort of skin conditions as well, Bec, it's a real sign that there might be an absorption gut thing going on as well, for sure.
Yeah, fatty acids show up. I think they're probably one of the easiest ones that you can, diagnose just through a chat or visually looking at somebody when they come in to see you. Like you said, there's the dots there's the things on the back of the arm. I always think vitamin A for that. Poor skin health in general, or poor skin immunity. So people who are really susceptible to like if they lose the little skin on the nail and that, it'll result in an infection and things like that. I always think, okay, you probably need your good fats. And also, I mean, mood and fat as diets have traditionally become fearful of fats, and how poor of a state we're in as a society now for balanced moods. We don't get enough sunlight, we don't eat enough of the right foods, we're not socially connected as much as we were pre-2020 either, and I think that makes a big difference as well. But these are all, fundamentally they're all signs of neuroinflammation.
Yes. And we forget this as well. Our brain is made up of fat. It's the majority of it is fat. So if someone's fat phobic, even just getting them to start having some nuts and seeds in their diet, maybe they have some flax seeds, maybe they have some chia seeds, all these sort of seeds that they can add in or hide or whatever, and just get up their their fats in general. And the benefits of the seeds is that we're also going to be supporting that digestion as well.
So let's go full circle, and we'll touch more on sort of neuroinflammation. What are you kind of employing in your practice now when it comes to addressing that? What's working for you?
Really, I'm looking for the trigger. Like, why are they expressing seizures, right? So as an example, so say that's a sign or a symptom. So what I'm looking for, so I might be looking at, well, what are their detox pathways looking like? Do they need support that way? So I may be using, liver support foods like choline and lecithin and, bitter greens, bitters, and we're supporting that gallbladder function. Because what we want to do is make sure that they're eliminating these toxins, especially heavy metals. You need bile to bind to them, and then you want to excrete it. So I know it's like neuroinflammation, detox pathways, but we're looking at supporting our body's ability to remove what could be triggering the inflammation that's leading to the neuroinflammation.
Yep.
We're also looking at potential infections, be it viruses, bacteria, parasites that could be causing this reactivity and potential blood-brain dysregulation. Another one, when we're thinking about blood-brain, so it's called the blood-brain barrier, like there's a barrier in the gut. That's how I like to think of it. So what we know is that heavy metals like mercury, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and I'm seeing this a lot in my clients, it dysregulates that blood-brain barrier and it becomes more leaky. And this is in the literature. This isn't a esoteric thing, this is evidence-based scientific analysis of what heavy metals do to the brain. We also know that heavy metals are stored in the brain.
Because of the fat, because fats, they'll store anywhere where there's fat, but in the brain especially.
Yeah. So when I said brain, I meant fat. And then also we want to think about that immune dysregulation and inflammation. So we know that turmeric's a really beautiful anti-inflammatory. We know saffron. I use a lot of hemp, as I said, hemp seeds, nuts and seeds in general, like flax seeds, sesame seeds. I used to use more fish oil. I don't use as much fish oil as I used to. You want to, if you do use fish oil, you want to make sure that you're getting a very clean fish oil where they've checked it for or cleaned it for toxins like mercury. What I do like is like an algal DHA, so a vegetarian source of DHA. So when we say our brain is the majority of fat, the fat that makes up the majority of that fat is DHA. So, providing DHA I use a lot. And then I think a lot about supporting detoxification pathways via, zinc, B vitamins, magnesium, clinically trialed probiotics and prebiotics as well, because what I find, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I would say you do, most people don't have a diversity of good bacteria. So it's a diversity of bacteria. We've got wastelands. So it's an environment, and those bacteria then act as anti-inflammatories. So you don't think of bacteria as anti-inflammatories, but they really do go in and down-regulate all those inflammatory pathways as well.
If they're the friendly, positive kind, absolutely. It'll be interesting, I think, over the next few years as everyone's become so fixated on, anti-germs and, sanitizing surfaces and masks and all of that. Like, I think that that's going to have a very real impact on kind of the microbiome as a whole, because it's everything that we eat, touch, breathe in. Like, we're constantly exposed to bacteria, both good and bad, and it is the job again of our immune system to use the barcode scanner. And the job of the immune system isn't to react, it's to not react, it's to have tolerance and to be able to cope with constant exposure and kind of put out that flame quickly without turning it into an inferno. And I think when we see dysregulated immunity and dysregulated neuroinflammation, it sort of shows that that mechanism is a bit faulty, or it's almost like worn out from overexposure, kind of like what happens to our cells becoming insulin resistant if we expose them to too much sugar. So yeah, I think that it all comes kind of down to that. And hands down, one of the biggest things would definitely be if you've got a gut that is not functioning well and it's giving you messages and signs that, you're not going to the toilet frequently, or when you do, you have poorly formed stool, you're either swinging between constipation and diarrhea, you've got gas, you've got bloating, you can't tolerate certain foods, you've got brain fog, you've got any of this, your gut is not functioning well, you're not absorbing and moving the nutrients where they need to go, you're setting yourself up for a cascade of problems. I think it all comes down to, if your gut's not forming well, start there.
Yeah. And, everything that fundamentally I treat, I always come back to the gut. Always. There's so much that we can do to change our body. And as you said, it's a cascade of inflammation. So it's trying to get in there and put a bit of a plug in to stop that, but then also finding where that's coming from as well, and
Mm.
doing that detective work so you can potentially eliminate that. And as you said, like, different bacteria can cause problems. We know that there's specific bacteria that they create byproducts that are really inflammatory to us. So understanding that there's things that could be in your body that potentially are starting that fire, or they're the little embers and then it goes up like this. So
Or as we
looking
live, at least in Australia, in this like kind of post-flood world that we're in as well,
for
like mold.
mold.
Like we could spend an hour talking about mold. We won't touch on it today, but just know that that's a trigger of neuroinflammation and gut problems for sure. I'll just throw that in there.
I had an interaction with a child who was living in a really moldy room and then sudden onset of seizures. And I'm like, get out of this room. You need to change that environment. Yeah. Mold is like there, and
Yeah.
especially on the east coast of Australia for sure. But it is about environmental triggers, and we don't think of the brain being influenced by what's around us, and it is. So for brain health, we want to be thinking about our nutrient status, including our fatty acid status, as you said, and are we eating enough feeders for our gut microbiome? Are we supporting ourselves in that way, and thinking about how we can support brain health in a really holistic way?
Mm. Yes, that is 100% it. So I think on that note, we might finish our conversation there, because we've probably given everybody lots of juicy nuggets to think on in there. If anyone has any questions, please drop them into the comments below and we will come back to you. But thanks so much for the chat. I love it when we chat. We chat not on video enough.
I love it when we chat too. You're amazing. Thanks so much.